Khashoggi, who is he? The business community in South Africa and elsewhere have moved on from the brutal killing of the Saudi journalist by Saudi operatives. So brutal that Jamal Khashoggi was hacked to pieces. That doesn't mean that we should forget what happened or not hold the leadership to account. What is it about Saudi Arabia that makes the world turn a blind eye to the atrocities committed against its own people on their own soil and abroad? And while we wait for the results of a UN investigation into the killing, the business machines are turning. The World Economic Forum members and Saudi Arabia are back in business. Cyril Ramaphosa's administration is expecting a $10 billion worth of investment from the Saudis to be pumped into the energy sector, including building refineries, petrochemicals and renewable energy. Ibrahim Dean is a researcher at the Afro-Middle East Center, and he joins us live on the line. Good to have you with us, Ibrahim Dean. Were you surprised that Saudi Arabia has been brought back in so quickly, business as usual?
No, I mean, it's not surprising. You know, as we've seen with many other countries and other regimes, it's not so much about the human rights, it's about two things, stability and economics. And, you know, in the Saudi case, we have a public, a sovereign wealth fund of around $200 billion, you know, a local investment drive of $500 million or, you know, $500 billion. And, you know, many of these international companies backed by their countries are seeking this investment, especially, you know, we're talking arms. As in the South African case, we're talking energy. And, you know, this has meant that human rights, or at least, you know, respect for normal diplomatic conventions has gone out the window.
And this has been going on for years, hasn't it? I mean, the fact that as far as U.S. foreign policy is concerned, one of the first trips that the president always takes is to Saudi Arabia. That is always a message that they are open for business and willing to be their allies.
Yes, I mean, it's the case. I mean, Saudi Arabia is not necessarily the exception. It's the norm. You know, we saw, for example, Macron go to Egypt just on Monday and sign 3 arms deals with the Sisi regime in spite of its human rights record. So, you know, it's unfortunate that countries often look at economics and the, you know, the military or the military-industrial complex guides their foreign policy. And, you know, we're seeing this with Saudi Arabia specifically because Mohammed bin Salman has been strategic, you know, in at least promising to open up the Saudi economy, promising Saudi investment, and that has happened. And this has, in a sense, meant that he has been absorbed from his, reckless adventures. I mean, Khashoggi is one of them. The war in Yemen is, I think, far worse.
Absolutely. But, I mean, this has also been a very good example of how they operate, many of the leaders in that region. You mentioned Egypt, Syria, Bashar al-Assad using chemical weapons on his own people. It's a direct message to them, isn't it? Don't mess with me, and people understand that pretty quickly.
Yes, I mean, I think that's the problem is when these regimes are not necessarily democratic, and they utilize stability and economics as the main key cogs of ensuring they remain in power. So they have this what we would call international legitimacy that, in a sense, makes up for the lack of domestic legitimacy. We're seeing this in Sudan currently, you know, where the president is getting support from all these regional powers, but protests are, quite widespread in the country. And
if we keep taking business from them and investing in them, there's no reason for them to stop, is there?
Yes, yeah. I mean, it's, we'd rather the devil we know than the devil we don't know, and this is unfortunately what many international or global powers. This is how they think.
It's not good, is it? Ibrahim Dean, thank you for talking to us. Let's just go on 8:30 p.m. and here's a quick look at the day's top international stories. British Prime Minister Theresa May is under pressure to renegotiate her Brexit deal. MPs voted last night on a series of amendments. She's expected to have a revised deal by February the 13th, but the EU has already said it's not willing to reopen the negotiations. Britain is due to leave the EU in less than 2 months. UNICEF says the Ebola outbreak in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo is now the second largest in history. Since the outbreak 6 months ago, more than 460 people have died, with nearly 300 more infected. The government and UN organizations are scaling up their response, but ongoing conflict in the area is hampering their efforts. And a blast of Arctic air has brought dangerously cold conditions to areas of the US, affecting about 110 million people. The Midwest has taken the brunt of it, with temperatures plunging to minus 33 degrees in Milwaukee. Add the wind chill factor, and it feels like minus 46. Cold weather advisories are in effect, and schools will be closed in some cities. Back to one of our top stories, Brexit and what it means for Germany and for South Africa. Britain's decision to pull out of the European Union is expected to hit the German economy hard. The German Economic Institute says exporters could face massive tariff increases if the UK leaves without a trade deal, and that exports between the two countries could fall by over 50%. German companies are especially worried about disruptions to supply chains and the movement of raw materials and parts. But some economists predict that Brexit could benefit Germany, as banks may move to Frankfurt, and with that will come around 10,000 financial jobs. Germany's ambassador to South Africa, Martin Schaefer, tells me about the shock of leaving the EU and what it means for Germany and us here.
I remember very well that morning when we woke up in Berlin, in Brussels, in Paris, and also in London, of course, when we learned what the result of the referendum was in June 2016. And I remember very well the feeling that I had and that I shared with millions of our European compatriots. We were shocked, and I must say it is still today, after, well, more than 2.5 years, hard to understand why the people of the United Kingdom are willing to leave the most successful project of peace, project of social upliftment, and project of prosperity that this earth has ever seen. But we have to accept what the people of the UK have decided. Now we have to find a proper and fair and pragmatic way out of the quagmire that we are in because of that decision by the British people.
Okay, so they are walking away. No deal is still possible. Is that the worst sort of scenario for Germany in particular? I know your economy is sluggish, and the rest of the EU.
Well, indeed, the world economy is in something of an upswing. After the financial crisis of just about 10 years ago, we have seen very good progress. Unemployment has gone down dramatically. Growth has been up. In Germany, there's almost no unemployment anymore. State resources are there, tax resources are there, so we live in the best worlds possible, and now we should do our very best to avoid a situation in which we make a contribution to that downswing. And of course, a no deal Brexit would be a disaster. I think it would be first of all a disaster for the United Kingdom, for the political impact, but also for the economic impact. It would be a problem for the European Union, but we continue to work together in a customs union, in a common market of then 450 million consumers and citizens, and we will continue on that path, and we hope, and we are sure, and we are convinced that with our British friends and partners, we'll find a way of living peacefully, pragmatically, and with friendship and partnership next to one another.
Because the reality is, if it doesn't go EU's way, and, well, those in the UK who don't want to leave at all, Germany exporters would face extra tariffs of nearly 3.8 billion if the UK left the EU without a trade deal. I mean, those are eye-watering figures.
Well, yes. Well, I think the UK is the third largest trade partner of Germany. We exchange goods in the tens of billions of pounds or euros every year. And if we have to find a new way without a customs union, then we need to employ thousands and thousands of officials for customs questions. And all that, we believe, is not really necessary, but we need to do it because then the UK will not be part of the common market, will not be part of the European Union, and will not be part of the common market, of the customs union, which means that we have to treat the UK and goods from the UK as something from outside, and then we do as our laws stipulate, of course.
There's a feeling and a hope coming from countries like South Africa that South Africa could possibly fill in a void, could become a talent resource for the UK and for the EU. But what do you think the ripple effect is to be here in South Africa?
Well, let me just give you a telling example, I believe. There's a lot of German companies that produce high-tech products in South Africa. One of them is BMW, and they produce right next here to Pretoria in Menlyn. They produce the X3 series, a wonderful car that they produce to sell it on the South African market. But the biggest part of that production goes abroad, and a considerable part of that is destined for the UK market. And just imagine there's a no deal Brexit on the 29th of March. That simply means that BMW doesn't know the rules on how to export a single X3 car for the UK market. What kind of tariffs does it have to pay? Is there a trade deal between the United Kingdom and South Africa? What are the rules that apply to the rules of origin? How is that all going to go about? What customs agent of South Africa and the UK knows what to do? So you see, even in South Africa, if you want German investment, South African employment, the lives and work of thousands of South African workers are, if you want, in danger or in peril simply because we don't know what the concrete dealings of a no-deal Brexit are going to be. And this is the case all over the place. Economies. So we are creating a lot of problems.
A little bit off topic here, but if you could answer this. The ship that has just been allowed to dock in Italy with migrants, what is Germany's stance now going forward, taking in more migrants and refugees? And do you think the Brexit deal will have an impact on that?
Well, there is no doubt that the financial crisis that we faced since 2008 and the migration crisis, the flow of migrants from the Middle East mainly, but also from Africa, has had a profound impact on the decision of the British people, the citizens of the UK, to vote the way they did in the referendum. And indeed, from 2015 on, we struggled with a flow of migrants that we had never seen before. I believe that both my country, Germany, but also the European Union, has learned a lot from the experience we had with this great inflow of migrants. We have had our issues with that, we have had our arguments with that, but we have found a way forward where we decided to better protect our borders, and I explicitly mean not the borders between the member states, but the outward borders of the European Union, and at the same time safeguard the principle of political asylum that is, I would like to say, holy for my country, because of the Holocaust and because of the Nazi era. For us, this constitutional right for political asylum is sacrosanct. And that is why the German government in the last 3 years kept up this stance very firmly. And on the concrete example and question you have asked, Jane, let me say that it's not easy to find the right answers, but we would believe and we are convinced that the principle of humanitarian assistance to people that are in emergency situations needs to be upheld in every situation.
So that's what Germany wants when it comes to migrants, tightening of borders and better controls. Now, this thinking within the EU has meant migrants are often left at sea. A group left stranded on a rescue boat for just over a week has just been allowed to disembark in Italy, but only to be moved elsewhere. The 47 mainly sub-Saharan African migrants were rescued off Libya by the Sea-Watch 3 ship. Chris Grodotsky from Sea Watchers says Italy has got the capacity to accommodate more migrants.
Italy is very well in the position to take in more. Various cities in Italy have said that they are willing and able to take a lot more people, and that they would be willing to let us enter their ports, but it is only the right-wing interior minister and the populist government that are blocking this humanitarian effort.
And what legal recourse do they have, or do you have, in order to get them there?
Well, that's very difficult at the moment. I mean, we have the law of the sea and the Geneva Convention on Refugees on our side. That's pretty obvious. People who start the journey to Europe from Libya, they're not supposed to be brought back to Libya, and of course they're not supposed to drown in the sea. So international law is very very clear on that. But so far, as long as no European government is on our side putting this law in force, then it becomes very difficult to...
I mean, the problem is this problem is not going to go away, is it? The numbers keep rising. We still have hotspots around the world. So something needs to be done. Something needs to break in order for it to happen. Well,
it is only the idea about migration. I mean, migration is something that has happened since humankind exists, and it is a very new idea that migration is something bad and something illegal, and that is the thing that has to break. The numbers aren't rising. The numbers are, there are waves where more people come. There are times when less people come, but the numbers aren't overall rising all the time. And there are areas in the world that are much more that receive much more people, more refugees, more internally displaced people, and don't call it a crisis like Europe does.
And the fact that they're leaving in the first place and prepared to endure such a hazardous journey which might end up in their deaths, the deaths of their families, just gives you a sense of how bad it is at home, what they're fleeing from.
Well, of course, people come from very different countries. A lot of people come from countries like Sudan, where there's the Darfur conflict, where there's a very bad dictatorship, or countries like Eritrea with even a worse dictatorship, or countries like Libya, where there's civil war, where there's no state authority that can protect anyone. And even if people come from better situations than Libya, once they are in Libya, they end up in torture camps. They're being raped, they're being sold as slaves, and people cannot stay in Libya. So from the point where they leave the Libyan shore, they are refugees. There are people who need to get out of this country, and there is literally no other way. That's what we've been told by many people, and that is also what international bodies like UNHCR and the IOM are observing there.
On paper, the UK and the EU have never been on the same page when it comes to taking these people in, these refugees, these migrants. Do you think it's going to get worse after Brexit?
Actually, I'm not so sure about the situation in the UK at the moment. I'm much more concerned about with the situation in Germany, in Italy, in Malta, and the places where we disembarked the people. But of course, the UK has this issue with the people coming from Calais, where they have shut down their own border for quite a while now, and where they have also pressured France to take care of the situation. I think,
sorry, Chris, if I can quickly jump in here. I mean, for many of them, once they even get to these places in Europe, the hardship is not over, is it?
Well, no. The people, I mean, they're out of Libya. That is a big leap for everyone who was stuck in Libya. In Europe, there are no torture camps. In Europe, there is also abuse in the camps. There's also an environment which we don't think is appropriate for people who fled war and who fled dictatorships. But they're not being tortured, they're not being killed, and they're not being sold as slaves. And that is a big leap for those people. At the same time, of course, the situation in Europe is very, very bad as well, and people should be welcomed and should be receptive in a very different way.
New feature on our show tonight. Jeffrey Stevens will be joining us next with the day's sport. And then tributes have been pouring in all day for R&B legend James Ingram. We ask South Africans how they remember him.